Hi, everybody. Welcome to the reading room. Okay, so today I'm going to read to you A Slow Walk of Trees by Toni Morrison. It is an example of a compare and contrast essay. Just give me a minute here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and then we will get started. Okay, and I do apologize. Moana is on in the background for my daughter, so that she doesn't bother me. Okay, so I promise I can see this. Slow Walk of Trees by Toni Morrison. His name was John Solomon Willis, and when at the age of 5, he heard from the old folks that the Emancipation Proclamation was coming, he crawled under the bed. It was his earliest recollection of what was to be his habitual response to the promise of white people, horror and an instinctive yearning for safety. He was my grandfather, a musician who managed to hold on to his violin, but not his land. He lost all 88 acres of his Indian mother's inheritance to legal creditors who built their fortunes on the likes of him. He was an unreconstructed Black pessimist who, in spite of or because of emancipation, was convinced for 85 years that there was no hope whatsoever for Black people in this country. His rancor was legitimate, for he, John Solomon, was not only an artist, but a first-rate carpenter and farmer, reduced to sending home to his family money he had made playing the violin because he was not able to find work. And this during the years when almost half the Black male population was skilled craftsmen who lost their jobs to white ex-convicts and immigrant farmers. His wife, however, was of a quite different frame of mind and believed that all things could be improved by faith in Jesus and an effort of the will. So it was she, Ardelia Willis, who sneaked her 7 children out of the back window into the darkness rather than permit the patron of their sharecropper's existence to become their executioner as well, and headed north in 1912, when 99.2% of all Black people in the US were native born and only 60% of white Americans were. And it was Ardelia who told her husband that they could not stay in the Kentucky town they ended up in because the teacher didn't know long division. They have been dead now for 30 years and more, and I still don't know which of them came closer to the truth about the possibilities of life for Black people in this country. One of their grandchildren is a tenured professor at Princeton. Another, who suffered from what the Peruvian poet called anger that breaks a man into children, was picked up just as he entered his teens and emotionally lobotomized by the reformatories and mental institutions specifically designed to serve him. Neither John Solomon nor Ardelia lived long enough to despair over one or swell with pride over the other. But if they were alive today, each would have selected and collected enough evidence to support the accuracy of the other's original point of view. And it would be difficult to convince either one that the other was right. Some of the monstrous events that took place in John Solomon's America have been duplicated in alarming detail in my own America. There was the public murder of a president in theater in 1865 and the public murder of another president on television in 1963. The Civil War of 1861 had its encore as a civil rights movement of 1960. The torture and mutilation of a Black West Point cadet, Cadet Johnson Whitaker, in 1880 had its rerun with the 1970s murders of students at Jackson State College, Texas Southern, and Southern University in Baton Rouge. And in 1976, we watched for what must be the 1000th time a pitched battle between the children of slaves and the children of immigrants. Only this time, it is not the New York draft riots of 1863, but the busing turmoil in Paul Revere's hometown of Boston. Hopeless, he said, hopeless, for he was certain that white people of every political, religious, geographical, and economic background would band together against Black people everywhere when they felt the threat of our progress. And 100 years after he sought safety from the white man's promise, somebody put a bullet in Martin Luther King's brain. And not long before that, some excellent samples of the master race demonstrated their courage and virility by dynamiting some little Black girls to death. If he were here now, my grandfather, he would shake his head, close his eyes, and pull out his violin, too polite to say, "I told you so." And his wife would pay attention to the music, but not to the sadness in her husband's eyes, for she would see what she expected to see, not the occasional historical repetition, but like the slow walk of a certain species of trees from the flatlands up into the mountains, she would see the signs of irrevocable and permanent change. She, who pulled her girls out of an inadequate school in the Cumberland Mountains, knew all along that the gentleman from Alabama who had killed the little girls would be rounded up. And it wouldn't surprise her in the least to know that the number of Black college graduates jumped 12% in the last 3 years, 47% in 20 years, that there are 140 Black mayors in this country, 14 Black judges in the district circuit, 4 in the courts of appeals, and 1 on the Supreme Court, that there are 17 Blacks in Congress, 1 in Senate, 276 in state legislatures, 223 in state houses, 53 in state senates. that there are 112 elected Black police chiefs and sheriffs, one Pulitzer Prize winner, one winner of the Prix de Rome, a dozen or so winners of the Guggenheim, 4 deans of predominantly white colleges. Oh, her list would go on and on. But so would John Solomon's sweet, sad music. While my grandparents held opposite views on whether the fortunes of Black people were improving, my own parents struck similarly opposed postures, but from another slant. They differed about whether the moral fiber of white people would ever improve. Quite a different argument. The old folks argued about how and if Black people could improve themselves, who could be counted on to help us, who would hinder us, and so on. My parents took issue over the question of whether it was possible for white people to improve. They assumed that Black people were the humans of the globe, but had serious doubts about the quality and existence of white humanity. Thus, my father, distrusting every word and every gesture of every white man on earth, assumed that the white man who crept up on the stairs one afternoon had come to molest his daughters and threw him down the stairs and then our tricycle after him. I think my father was wrong, but considering what I have seen since, it may have been very healthy for me to have witnessed that as my first Black-white encounter. My mother, however, believed in their possibilities. So when the meal we got on relief was bug-ridden, she wrote a long letter to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And when white bill collectors came to our door, it was she who received them civilly and explained in a sweet voice that we were people of honor and that the debt would be taken care of. Her message to Roosevelt got through our meal, and our meal improved. Her message to the bill collectors did not always get through, and there was occasional violence when my father, self-exiled to the bedroom for fear he could not hold his temper, would hear that her reasonableness had failed. My mother was always wounded by these scenes, for she thought the bill collector knew that she loved good credit more than life, and that being in arrears on a payment horrified her probably more than it did him. So she thought he was rude because he was white. For years, she walked to utility companies and department stores to pay bills in person, and even now she does not seem convinced that checks are legal tender. My father loved excellence, worked hard. He held 3 jobs once for 17 years, and was so outraged by the suggestion of personal slackness that he could explain it to himself only in terror of racism. He was a fastidious worker who was frightened of one thing, unemployment. I can remember now the doomsday come graveyard sound of laid off, and how the minute school was out, he asked us, "Where are you working?" Both my parents believed that all succor and aid came from themselves and their neighborhood, since they, white people in charge, and those not in charge, but the obstructionist positions, were in some fundamentally genetically way corrupt. So I grew up in a basically racist household with more than a child's share of contempt for white people. And for each white friend I acquired who made a small crack in that contempt, there was another who repaired it. For each one who related to me as a person, there was one who, in my presence at least, became actively white. And like most Black people in my generation, I suffer from racial vertigo that can be cured only by taking what one needs from one's ancestors. John Solomon's cynicism and his deployment of his art as both weapon and solace. Ardelia's faith in the magic that can be wrought by sheer effort of the will. My mother's open-mindedness in each new encounter and her habit of trying reasonableness first. My father's temper, his impatience, and his efforts to keep throw them, out of his life. And it is out of these learned and selected attitudes that I look at the quality of life for my people in this country now. These widely disparate and sometimes conflicting views, I suspect, were held not only by me, but by most Black people. Some I know are clearer in their positions, have not sullied their anger with optimism or dirtied their hope with despair. But most of us are plagued by a sense of being worn shell-thin by constant repression and hostility, as well as the impression of being buoyed by visible testimony of tremendous strides. There is repetition of the grotesque in our history, and there is the miraculous walk of trees. The question whether our walk is progress or merely movement. O.J. Simpson leaning on a Hertz car is better than the Gold Dust Twins on the back of soapbox. But is good time better than step and fetch it? Has the first order of business been taken care of? Does the law of the land work for us? And that, my friends, is Slow Walk of Trees by Toni Morrison. Thanks for joining my wonderful reading room, and I will see you later. Bye, guys.